Welcome to LSCDS Speaks. This is a new initiative by LSCDS with the goal of enhancing professional growth for students and postdocs. My name is Maria, and I will be your host as we talk about all things professional development to help you make that next career move. But before I begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, listed on the screen here, without whose support this episode would not be possible. It's very hard to have a conversation with someone about professional development today and not have LinkedIn brought up. But have you started working on your LinkedIn profile, and do you effectively engage with the platform? Our guest today, Rob Kim, is one of LinkedIn's top voices for job searches and careers, and he will be helping us debunk 12 LinkedIn myths that prevent people from effectively engaging with the platform. So in addition to being one of LinkedIn's top voices, Rob is a career strategist at UBC, where he supports students and alumni in navigating their career journeys. Rob also runs a podcast, Career Carrots, and a large mentorship program. So we're very excited to have Rob here today to talk to us about LinkedIn.
Maria, thank you so much for having me. My name is Rob Kim. I work as a career strategist for the Faculty of Land and Food Systems, we call LFS, out at University of British Columbia. Part of that role is really like a career educator role. So we kind of do traditional career stuff, but I also support programs like a LFS mentorship program. I do a lot of kind of digital resources. We have a podcast as well, a Career Carrots podcast. So if you want to listen to that, you can. That's for our undergraduate students, but there's some good career stuff in there. And then that kind of connects to LinkedIn. Probably about 4 years ago, I really just started wanting to learn a lot more about LinkedIn because I had to do webinars for it. And I was like, well, I better learn this platform a little bit more. And that kind of just went from there. And I guess you asked how it can contribute to your career. And so real quick, like 3 ways I think about it is just like, the first one is like, just there's tons of job strategies, personal branding, little tips and tricks that LinkedIn can do. That's one. Number 2, for me personally, what's a weird thing is through kind of writing content, original content and posting, it gave me some confidence in myself and helped me figure out my voice. I realized I hadn't been doing a lot of explicit reflection. I think about science. We're a lot of doers, right? So we do a lot of things, but sometimes we don't go through the data and we don't write the report as often as we should. And so I realized that really helped me find confidence in my values and my skills and what I had to offer. And then the third thing, kind of larger for my career, I've always been an educator. So it's really allowed me to scale my audience. And, it's kind of obvious that there's different ways to educate, right? But for me to actually experience it through a digital medium, like I'm not just in the classroom, I get to speak to people all over the world. And that's like kind of how we met, right? Through kind of an intro to an intro, like that sort of works sometimes. And so those kind of things have been really neat to see. And I've really been fortunate to benefit from my usage of LinkedIn that way.
It's really great that LinkedIn has had so many benefits for you. And I think a lot of people struggle a little bit in terms of starting with LinkedIn and even when they're continuing to use it. So for today, we've compiled 12 different myths about LinkedIn that hopefully we can get through. And I've categorized them into 3 main categories. So LinkedIn profiles and personal achievements, LinkedIn connections and professional growth, and LinkedIn and the hiring process. So why don't we get into talking about these different myths?
Yeah, let's go.
Thanks. So for the first category, or the first theme, it's there to really get a better sense of how we should be setting up our profile. So really for those newbies getting on LinkedIn. And myth number 1 is, I should only connect with individuals who will expand my professional network.
Should only connect with so I guess in this case you're asking with people who are like in your industry or in your degree. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Or
Yeah.
people, I guess, that are in roles that you're interested in getting into.
Yeah. I like that, the myth, like we can pop that one right away, but even before we get there, let's even just address like everything I say in this, like these are all just recommendations and ideas. At the end of the day, what's really important is I just encourage people just to do things. because there's going to be someone telling you like, hey, you shouldn't do this versus you should do this, right? And literally, if I knew the best way to do LinkedIn, we'd have a short podcast, right? Because I'd be like, here are three things and it's going to work for everyone. So I want to be clear with that. I think it's really, we forget that, even though that's common sense. Like, you do you, like, it's fine. So these are all going to be from my point of view and biases. And I will say that you're going to have someone who's listening like, no way, like that's not a myth. So I just want to start there for the whole context of the podcast, right, Maria? I talk about weak ties versus strong ties. Have you ever heard about that concept?
No.
Yeah, so it's like a social concept from Mark Granovetter, and he said something along the lines like, hey, your strong ties are friends and family, people you know really well, right? And you spend a lot of time, you have a lot of interests, like shared interests, versus weak ties where it's like people you know, you and me could be a weak tie now, right? You kind of know your alumni, people you might have worked with, you've met a few times and you have maybe a couple interests. Why I'm bringing this up, and I think this will help in the context of the entire LinkedIn. I really like using weak ties as a reframe for myself, because often I'm like, I don't know a lot of people. Or I think when we think about our networks, it's like almost like your best friends. That's too much pressure, right? So really, in Granovetter's kind of social theory, it talks about how weak ties are actually really important for your career, because that's the way you learn about new opportunities or new roles. So I think it's great to target people in your direct like roles that you want, but often, Maria, we might not know what other jobs are out there. So
Mhm.
I think it's okay to connect to other people, because also you can learn from other people that you can still bring into your own role, and that's weak tie power. So actually, in the Journal of Science in September, they did a study about that, and they showed that weak ties really had an impact for people getting that new job opportunity. So I'm kind of popping myth one there. I think it's okay to connect with people outside of your professional network. It's just, I think it's hard for us sometimes to be like, why would I be bothering this person, right?
Definitely. And I think that really works very well into myth two,
Yeah.
where we're talking about the number of connections and if that really matters. So I think there's a myth about people needing to connect with basically anybody and everybody possible on LinkedIn to get the algorithm to promote them more. How do you find that this social theory kind of fits into that? Is that too much of an extreme, or what are your opinions?
Yeah, I guess you're saying like just connect to anybody and everybody.
Yeah.
Again, I think you just do what works for you at this moment. Like, that's something I used to do, and then I would get a little bit targeted, right? So, because sometimes you don't really know what you're looking for either. I just think you have to be careful if you're doing like a wide, broad connection, you're going to get more rejection. It's like resumes, right? Like if you're applying to lots of hundreds of jobs, like, just kind of the spray and pray approach, that's okay as long as you realize like I'm going to just get lower hits, right? As opposed to maybe a customized approach, which is the exact same analogy for connecting, right? Like you can do a spray and pray approach, just you probably won't maybe get a lot of connections. The LinkedIn algorithm, I want to address that too. I think that's just a scary thing and it's also things that people can sell, right? Saying like, I know the algorithm. There's definitely an algorithm involved, but to really know it, I don't know. At the same time, it's like, again, just do what you need to do, and I'm more concerned about what are you actually doing rather than what are you thinking of, because when you're thinking that way, you usually don't do anything, right? It's really hard to do things, right? So, but I will say that I do know that LinkedIn really likes your profile when you can get to about 500 connections. Um,
Um,
but like scale happens, right? Like I think I'm at about almost 10,900 connections. I mean, certainly it helps me connect a lot better, right? And also when I got the, top voice designation last year, now it's a lot easier if I reach out to people, right? Like, and so it just, but I think what's important for people to be listening, like I also was practicing and building that up over 4 years. Like it doesn't happen overnight.
Thank you. So let's move into myth number three, which is I should only post professional content on LinkedIn.
This is a controversial one because you'll see like lots of people. LinkedIn has changed a lot in the last 2 years, right? Because they have content creation now. There are a lot of people posting way more. It used to be a lot of job updates or, those sort of things. So you see way more kind of content, social media content. But there's lots of people that you'll see will be like, this doesn't belong on LinkedIn. So again, I think these myths they're actually facts for some people, right? So I look at it more. I do think you want to think a little bit more about, depending where you are in your career, of like, what am I sharing? Because certainly people can see this content and unfortunately sometimes make judgments about you, which could maybe affect or, create biases. So on my end right now, like, I'm okay. I sometimes post way more vulnerable things than I would ever say in person in a weird way. I don't know why.
It's a
Um, but I also am at a place where like I'm much further along in my career than you are, right? So I'm okay to sometimes maybe use my voice and my privilege to help speak or talk or those sort of things. That I don't know if I would have done that in my 20s necessarily. So again, I think it's okay where you want. I would more reframe the myth of like, what am I trying? Why? And there's space for you to do that on LinkedIn. That's what I like about it. Like, if you want to be vulnerable, you can do that. But if you want just professional content, you can do that. It is like a Swiss Army kind of like social media site, but there
Mhm.
is a little bit of civility layered into everything because of, employers are watching. That's
Mhm.
why I think it's overall, to me, I love this social media site. I like it because it's most of the time encouraging. I mean, it could be fake, but it is still a bit safer than some other social media sites in some ways.
Mhm. Thank you. I think that was it's a very nuanced question, and I think you gave a very complex answer.
Thank you.
Okay, so myth number 4 is I should post both successes and failures on my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, I mean, again, myth, like, I can see someone saying like, no, you shouldn't do that. Like, or yeah, you should. So it goes again to maybe a little bit more intentionality of like, why are you sharing the success and why are you sharing your failures? Um, I recognize sometimes when I was writing content, like I would almost like get in a frame where like, I'm going to share my failure because that content does well, right? It resonates. But then at one time I'm like, am I just doing this for the sake of like views? And then I'm losing kind of the message. So, you go through a lot of these things. I really, the last two myths, Maria, to me is more just like, can you post one thing? Like I would just start there, because that to me is, out of all the hundreds and hundreds of workshops and the thousands of students and alumni I've talked to, the hardest thing for anyone to do is to do a post. That's it.
Yeah.
So when I remember my first post, and I would kind of post once every couple weeks when I started, like, that's scary. And it's still scary when I post today, even though it's just like more of a habit, if that makes sense.
And I completely agree. I have a very hard time posting on LinkedIn too, and I think most people do because
Everyone does.
yeah, you were talking about vulnerability, and I think even just any random post that you think is relevant, it takes one, it takes time. You have to, like you're saying, reflect and think about why you're doing it, and two is kind of you being vulnerable and not knowing, is it worth it?
Yeah. I think what it is it's this weird thing is like, you do want to have some intentionality, but I also don't want to get caught up like, hey, it's going to lead me to XYZ. Right. So like, if I had 4 years ago started posting like, oh, by doing this and building up my audience, I'm going to become a top voice, like, that just would have really changed, I think, the way I would have been speaking and writing. You know what I mean? Like, I could have
Mm,
thought maybe it's a possibility. And I did think about that when I saw like Adrian Tom, who's from Canada. She was like a top voice. I was like, oh, a Canadian, like in Calgary, right? So, but yeah, it wasn't like the reason why I was doing it. Do you know what I'm saying? So I just think 3 and 4. I get what people are, why you might be asking this, but I think it's actually, to be honest, more excuses to keep us safe from actually posting.
yes.
And I get that, right? So I'm here to tell all of you, writing one post is is so difficult. And I think it's important not to get caught up in the metrics, right? Because it's this weird thing, like when we post in our mind, we want it to go big or viral. But like I've had a couple posts go big, and I'll tell you, Maria, whether they go big or no one looks at them, at the end of the day, like nothing changes in a weird way. It's what I realize, if you're trying to again build an audience, let's say, or build a voice or presence or your brand, it's the totality of all these habits that add up.
I think that's a great place to leave theme one off on.
Yeah.
And for the second theme, which is LinkedIn connections and professional growth. So this theme is more about focusing on the how, when, and who we connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really important for those people trying to network right now. So for myth 5, then it's I should only be connecting with people in my LinkedIn network when I need something from them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great one. I personally, my own strategy is I don't like that approach, because if I don't know you and I'm asking for something like a job, that tactic is usually not, I mean, it can work, but it's very low percentage, right? Like if I don't, so I look at more like, can I use LinkedIn just to build trust with people, maybe build connections? So down the line, maybe I can ask for help, or maybe it leads to a new opportunity. So, I'm a huge believer of the law of reciprocity, right? You give, and then you will get back. Now, the problem with that is you just don't know when you're going to get back or who that's going to be. And sometimes it's also recognizing the boundaries, like give is one thing, but if you're taking an advantage of, or you're just doing free stuff, that's not helpful too. So it's a fine line, but that's my personal opinion on that.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, LinkedIn's it's like networking but online, right? That's why it was created.
Yeah, it is. And I like it more like, I like to learn from people. I like to learn from different industries. The concept in, a lot of business students will have the concept of coffee chats or informational interviews. I don't think we do a good job in life sciences to say like, hey, and so I frame it like this. Most graduate students in life sciences, like, you're good researchers, right? Well, researching can be done in formal ways of like going to the library, going online, those are, so I like LinkedIn. You can, if you're at U of T, I would go to University of Toronto page, go to the alumni page. It's a Boolean search. It's all stuff that you're used to, right? It's got to be the right keywords, but you can find lots of different people and passively learn, right? So I always say in careers, like, you can't be what you can't see, right? So you can be like, who's doing similar work? And when you find someone, it's not only where they're at, it's like, what have they done in between to maybe realize like, oh, that's a paid position, or that's something like, because I don't necessarily think that all of you in graduate schools should be thinking about academia. I'm not saying all of you are, right? But that's sometimes an often easy thing for people to do, right? So I want to expand my horizons a bit. What I'm getting at is like, you can passively research, but then you can also actively reach out to say, hey, I saw your profile, would love to chat with you. I also studied the same thing, 15 minutes, here's some times, blah, 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 like a reach out. Because we also know as graduate students, you don't just learn from books, you learn from the people around you, right? Your preceptor, like people in your lab, other people around the world, right? So it's like, why wouldn't you have those same strategies for your own career, things that you naturally do as, students in life sciences? I would actually say that all of you are really good and will have great success using LinkedIn, because you're just adapting the same research principles that many of you already do and love doing.
Yeah, I love these analogies. I think they really like make what LinkedIn is resonate so much better because they're linked to daily activities.
Yeah. We know the learning research shows when you apply learning from one area to an unknown area, in this case, LinkedIn is unknown for a lot of us, let's say, that's a great way to learn. So that's why I like to use those analogies. And that's why, like, to me, science is an analogy for career, right? You just make a hypothesis, you experiment, you look at the data, you modify the hypothesis. You never get to the truth, right? But you get closer and closer to truth. I think that's career. Like, I wish I could get to the truth of a career, but you're just iterating over and over. And I think LinkedIn does that. So notice I have a science background. I keep approaching LinkedIn as experiment. Why? Because then all the failure I do and the mistakes I make, I just have a little bit more grace for myself, right? Because we're really critical. Or the first thing that goes wrong is like, oh my goodness, I'm never going back on LinkedIn, right?
Definitely. And I think you've just debunked myth 6 as well,
Sure.
which is LinkedIn is only for people in the job market.
Yeah.
So myth 7 is job applications submitted through LinkedIn are an ineffective way of getting attention. The idea behind it being there's just so many job applications that go through, you're probably not going to catch the recruiter's eye.
Well, I mean, that's not a myth. So the one thing that I've learned from a lot of recruiters, some larger companies will have the job posting on LinkedIn versus they have their own company website. So the only part of that myth I would push back is it seems like most recruiters companies would prefer if you just go through their site, even though they'll eventually see them through the LinkedIn, because there's a whole other organization behind that, right? So when in doubt, I would try to go direct through the company page, even if there's like a dual posting, right? The same one. So that's the only part I would say, but really, it's not an ineffective way of getting attention. It's more like, is your resume and application clear to the recruiter that you can do this job? And that goes to, again, like customizing your resume or really making sure you're writing clearly to the role. I think there is some truth to it, right? Like I said, go to the company's page if you can, but people are going to get jobs through LinkedIn if you're showing up as that right candidate. And frankly, right, recruiters pay thousands of dollars for a LinkedIn recruiter, which they're searching for keywords through all of LinkedIn for potential candidates to reach out to, right? So yeah, that myth is like sort of right, but sort of not, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think you were you were talking about the your actual resume and kind of the cold kind of call answer. So either apply through LinkedIn, or you're suggesting what might be better is apply through the company website. But what about the social element when it comes to submitting your resume? So this gets into myth number 8, which is I shouldn't or should connect with hiring managers through LinkedIn. Yeah.
I think the strategy I've kind of settled with for, talking to students more would be, first of all, it's assessing like how well do you know that person, right? Because a lot of times, like if, you don't know that person well, it's not that people don't want to help you, but if they're referring you, they're standing behind their reputation. So I try not to put people in those awkward situations, but sometimes you might have in the past. So you kind of read the room where if it's like, they're not super responsive, I'm not going to push anymore. Like that's a signal like they're not comfortable, and I don't want to put people in those situations. But I think one thing, if you really know their hiring manager well or someone on the team well, especially for a larger company, you certainly might want to have a conversation, because sometimes they have direct referral links, which of course are going to elevate your application, right? But that's usually with like larger companies. But sometimes they might put a word in you. But that's like where I might have a pretty good relationship with that person. But it's certainly, if you kind of maybe weak link know the hiring manager, I think the one strategy will be you apply and then you message that hiring manager, say, hey, I just want to let you know I've applied for this role. I'm interested for XYZ. Maybe even take a little bit of your cover letter if you're using one, but keep it short and sweet. And you're not asking them, right, for anything more. You're just kind of like alerting them to the fact that, hey, I've put my hat in the ring, because sometimes some people aren't aware of what your situation is, because you're not communicating it all day long to everyone, right? Like, I'm looking for a job with your company, these sort of things. So they might be surprised. But I think I'd rather for you to maybe apply again if you know the hiring manager, and then like just let them know. But again, like, I don't know. I think just people overthink things. It's just like test one strategy out and do that a few times until it works or until you need something different.
Okay, I think that's a good point. And moving on to our third theme, which is still connected to the hiring process. So LinkedIn and the hiring process. And this is for people who are looking to currently make a career transition. So our ninth myth is I don't need to update my LinkedIn, and having a basic profile is enough.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think it's like, again, whatever amount of energy and time you have, like that's all you can do, right? Like but every now and then I do like to take stock, like about 6 months or so. I'm like, okay, how do I want to switch it up? So I think a basic profile can do the trick, but if I'm including my LinkedIn, especially at the top of my resume, like I love when people do that because there's just no way I can't click on it. And I think it's cheating a little bit because suddenly you're biasing that person because they get to see visuals, right? Like there's much more they can see than just on a piece of paper. And so in that case, I would want to have some things that back up or highlight things. I might use some multimedia. Maybe, again, if I'm a been doing research, you can maybe, if you can, share a little bit of an article or a snapshot of your abstract, or again, maybe a picture of you in your lab, like whatever you have. And so I think there's so many nice ways to kind of augment your experience. One strategy I haven't tested out, but Sarah Johnson, who's pretty big on LinkedIn, she has an article that talked about thinking about your profiles like search engine optimization, like, Google, and talking about like, you might want your skills, like, especially if you know the role that you want to go into, thinking about the skills and the things that you need related to that role, having that 9 times in your profile, right? Because you're increasing the search engine optimization of a LinkedIn recruiter because they punch in keywords, right? So that's everything from your headline, right, to your about section, to your experience, to the skills section, right? So if you pepper that through, you can get about like 6, 7, 8, 9 times having some keyword. Now, I wouldn't just copy and paste keywords in, but you can put those keywords in there. Or again, thinking about your profile, it's understanding that certain industries, they might have a similar skill or a title, but they use it more specific, right? So again, having those ones. But that 9 times one, I haven't tested that out yet with someone, but I was like, yeah, that makes sense though, right? If there's a recruiter, how can I help them discover me? Well, they're not going to discover me if I have one keyword, right? They're looking for that match.
Heading to our next myth, you mentioned pictures. And so our myth number 10 is I need a professional looking profile picture or background to get attention.
Yeah, I look at, again, thinking about, take a look at your profile pictures and just ask, what are you conveying about your brand? Now, in science, life science, we don't think about branding, but to me, what personal branding is, it represents kind of like my story and who I am. And that's okay, right? So I'm not talking about like branding, like necessarily selling myself. I also reframe branding as like, hey, if like think about all you graduate students, like how hard you've worked to get to where you are, right? Like you have skills, you have done things, right? So it's like, why wouldn't I want to reward myself for all the hard work I've done to keep on getting more opportunities to do what I want to do? Part of that is your branding, right? It's like your story. Like if you don't know your story well, who else is? So long way to get to, like, I think your picture can be, and your banner is part of your brand. And so I look at more like, it's not going to get you the job, but it could maybe showcase a little bit of yourself. So definitely for your picture, like, don't like, make sure you're not cropping yourself out of a group picture. You're trying to fill up maybe 3/4 of the frame with your shoulders and face. Why? Because it's a persistent element, because it's on mobile. So unless you're a hand model or something, right? Like it makes sense that you want to see that face a little bit larger, even though it feels weird. And I think the banner's underutilized. It's, again, not going to get you the job. The analogy I use here, Maria, is like part of cleaning up your space before people come, right? Like, it's just tidying up your space. So when people come, you feel like, oh, I feel confident in my space and safe, or more welcome in my space, right? It's not like, some people are going to come and they're going to be fine with your place being messy. It's just more for you. I think about a lot of that. It's like, hey, I want to tidy up my profile till it's a point where it's okay and I feel fine. Like, again, the banner is very underutilized, but man, there's just no excuse for just even changing it up. Like, if you go to the alumni search tool, you will just see that gray background. And so, like, just even a pop of color, you're going to stand out if someone's like scanning through things, right? So, and Canva, it's the free template. It's like the my banner. If you look at it later, I just use that from Canva, right?
Okay, so I'm going to move on to myth number 11, and it's a kind of an iteration on what we previously talked about, but with a little bit different. So myth number 11, hiring managers check LinkedIn profiles during the hiring process.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to everyone, but for me, when I'm hiring students, I will look at any social media site that you have. Facebook. So it sounds creepy, right? Like, I'll check Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, just to get a sense, right? Because sometimes remember, people are trying to build trust and they're saying like, hiring is so important. So who can I find the person that I think is going to be well suited, but also, and now that's unfair though too, right? Because, social media does not represent who you are, but certainly I check it all the time. Now, I would assume not everyone does, but I would say that more and more people are probably going to peek at it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I check LinkedIn too, with even people you meet, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Events. Yeah. So it does make sense that they would look. And finally, myth number 12. You definitely answered this already, but I'm just going to go ahead. So it's for the sake of order.
Yeah.
Myth number 12 is I should include a link to my LinkedIn profile on my resume.
Yeah, I'm going to be very clear. I don't like the word should because it implies everyone has to do it. Like, I want to share with some people listening, like, if you don't like social media and if you don't like LinkedIn, like, don't use it. Like, I have lots of people in my life who don't have LinkedIn at all, and they have a wonderful career, a rich, robust career, right? So I just want to be very careful because I think it's easy to get caught up in the narrative, especially at your age, right? You're feeling like everyone's doing these things, especially with social media. Let's just start right there. It's like, you do you. However, I will say again, from a competition or advantage standpoint, I would think in my mind strategically is like, well, I'm competing with all these people. Why wouldn't I try to get an edge where I can include a link to my profile that showcases another snapshot of me? Now, it also does work against you where, let's say you might be trying to move into 3 different industries or 3 different roles. That's where it could work against you, though. If I go to your LinkedIn, it's like, this is like, Rob's talking about education here, but he's applying, like that's the tricky part, right? Like, you want sometimes the recruiter or the hiring manager to confirm or validate like that it matches, right? So, and that gets into a whole, like, I don't have the time and energy to like recreate my profile every time, depending on what I'm applying for. So you can see it's like, again, at the end of the day, it's up to you, but I still think I would include it if I've done some work on my profile. But I can tell right away too, like, it's low. Like, again, think about bias. Like, it's good until it isn't. Like, if you send me to your profile and I can see that there's no activity and there's been nothing done, it actually creates a negative bias unfairly for you, right? Because I'm just like, oh, like, we just jump to these subconscious conclusions, which aren't representative of you, right?
Kind of touching upon that before we end, I wanted to get your 2 cents on LinkedIn and where you see it going in the next couple of years. And if there are other websites like social media or other resources that you think would be very helpful to look at when you're looking at networking.
Well, let's address, like, when I said you don't need social media. So other platforms, I think it's just more like real in-person things, right? So again, whether it's attending events at your university, this is the one thing that I think people forget. Like, yes, you're going there for education, but there's so many events and things that you can be a part of. It's just, again, overwhelming. But, like, are you going to your, U of T career fair? Are you going to, a graduate association event, right? Or are you going to like that conference? Those are ways, because again, if you're not using LinkedIn, that's fine. But then my question would be, well, then how are you building your networks? But also that's starting small, right? Like I think always people like think about these grand, like I'm an introvert. So like, going to big events, not my jam. It doesn't excite me. So it might feel like a chore. So I just think of like, how are you networking at your lab? Like, when's the last time you talked to a couple profs in your department, the graduate student, your fellow graduate students, right? Like, you'd be surprised that how much we don't sometimes spend time just networking. And when I mean networking, it's just having conversations with people. I have probably at least 1 to 2 coffee chats a month minimum with people at UBC. Why? Because I'm learning from them. Human connection always is great, and I have to schedule these things in because I'm so busy. But what really is, it's me saying I'm making time for this for myself, right? And so I want to encourage people, like when you're talking about platforms, like use your current place, volunteering, where you're working, part-time jobs. Those are weak links. Like, I always tell students like 3 of my last 6 jobs were from people that I worked with at UBC long time ago. You just don't know when someone's going to make you aware of a new connection.
So thank you for being here today, Rob, and helping us learn more about the 12 different myths about LinkedIn.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Maria. Sorry if I was too long-winded on some of the questions, but answers, but I appreciate being here. Thanks a lot.
Wow, Rob did a great job of debunking those LinkedIn myths. And I'd like to thank him again for his time. I really appreciated the analogies he used when discussing how to approach LinkedIn. And I know a lot of you who engage with LSCDS come from a life science background. So thinking of LinkedIn as a science experiment is a great way to approach professional development online. For those of you looking to put those tips into action, check out the LSCDS website for upcoming networking events. And if you're interested in more career advice from Rob, check out his podcast, Career Carrots. In our next episode of LSCDS, we will be discussing the Life Science Career Expo, which is hosted by the LSCDS, and we will be learning how we can expand our possibilities. So enjoy LSCDS and stay tuned for the last Monday of every month for LSCDS Speaks, a podcast brought to you by graduate students and postdocs who are interested in improving graduate professional development. See you next month.